Imagine this. You're standing on a dusty hillside in ancient Galilee, the sun beating down, as a young rabbi named Jesus looks straight into the eyes of a crowd filled with the oppressed, the angry, and the broken. He says something that shatters everything they know. Love your enemies. But what if that word love wasn't just a warm feeling? What if it demanded something dangerous, something that could upend your world right now? In 2026, what hidden spiritual power lies in those ancient words that we've buried under centuries of misunderstanding? Could unlocking it not only heal the divisions tearing us apart, but also awaken God's presence in your own heart? Stay with me. Welcome to Understanding the Word. I am Pastor Najim. Because this isn't just history, it's a divine revelation waiting to transform you. We've all heard it before. Love your enemies. It sounds nice on a bumper sticker or in a Sunday sermon. But in a world where social media feeds explode with hate, political rivals demonize each other, and personal grudges simmer for years, does it really hold up? Or does it feel like an impossible ideal? Something we nod at but never truly live. From a Jewish perspective, this command echoes the Torah's call to love your neighbor, but Jesus expands it radically to include enemies, a move that stunned his listeners. The Hebrew text in Leviticus 19:18 emphasizes ahav, a love rooted in covenant loyalty toward one's neighbor, not fleeting emotion. Yet Jesus pushes this into uncharted territory. Later Christian writers understood this as a gate, selfless love, but the original Aramaic Jesus spoke adds raw urgency. This isn't passive tolerance. It's an active pursuit that challenges our instincts and invites God's transformative power into our daily battles. Now, picture Jesus not as a distant figure in stained glass, but as a first-century Galilean speaking in the everyday language of his people, Aramaic. Why does that matter? Because words carry the weight of their world, and translations can soften the edges, sometimes dimming the spiritual fire within. Have you ever wondered why some Bible verses hit differently when you dig into the original tongue? Almost like unlocking a hidden door to divine insight. The Aramaic context reveals a culture steeped in oral tradition, where words weren't just sounds, but commitments that bound the speaker to heaven's purposes. From a historical viewpoint, Aramaic was the lingua franca of the Near East, influenced by Hebrew roots and Persian echoes, spoken by Jews under Roman rule. Scholars like Joachim Jeremias, 1971, highlight how Jesus' teachings often played on Aramaic wordplay. Lost in Greek manuscripts, the New Testament was written in Greek, but Jesus' words were likely delivered in Aramaic, preserved in later translations, like the Peshitta from the 2nd to 5th centuries, drawing from 1st century oral traditions. This linguistic bridge shows us a Jesus who wasn't abstract but immediate, demanding response here and now, as if inviting us into God's eternal dialogue. At the core of this command lies the Aramaic word for love, habib. But what if habib isn't just affection? Like we think of love in English, what raw power does it hold that could make enemies into allies? And how might it stir a spiritual awakening within us? Habib, in Aramaic, carries a sense of deep, cherished affection, like a beloved one, with personal and intimate connotations. It's related to the Hebrew ahav, which in texts like Deuteronomy 6:5 commands wholehearted devotion to God. Yet, when applied to enemies, it blends with broader concepts of active compassion, such as Hebrew raham for mercy, or hesed for steadfast kindness, suggesting not mere emotion, but a committed regard that demands action. From a Jewish perspective, this love extends to the stranger, as in Exodus 23:9, reminding Israel of their own oppression. Theologically, Later Christian interpreters linked it to God's hesed, steadfast love, but the Aramaic Habib emphasizes a visceral, relational warmth, opening a pathway for God's grace to flow through us. Archaeological finds, like the mosaic inscriptions from the Huqaq synagogue in Galilee, which include benedictions of peace upon Israel, show how such terms were tied to communal restoration and prayers for peace. In the world Jesus knew, enemies weren't abstract concepts. They were Roman soldiers patrolling your streets, tax collectors squeezing your livelihood, or rival factions plotting in the shadows. How did Aramaic speakers view conflict? With a mix of survival instinct and sacred hope, often seeing it as part of a larger spiritual narrative. Have you felt that tension in your own divided community, wondering if there's a heavenly purpose behind it? Culturally, Aramaic-speaking Jews drew from the Hebrew Bibles stories of reconciliation, like Joseph forgiving his brothers in Genesis 50. But enemies were often seen through the lens of Psalms, where cries for justice mingled with calls for mercy, hinting at God's overarching plan. From a theological angle, the Qumran scrolls reveal a dualistic view, light versus darkness, but Jesus subverts that, commanding Habib toward the other as a means to advance God's kingdom. Historically, in the 1st century, under Herod in Rome, conflict was daily. Habib challenged the cycle of vengeance, promoting shalom, wholeness that echoes God's restorative heart. But it reveals God's heart, restoration over retaliation, a truth that still whispers to our fractured society, inviting us to join in the spiritual work of mending what sin has broken. Now, contrast that with the Greek word in the Gospels, agape. Agape is noble, selfless love, but does it capture the earthy punch of Habib? Agape, used in Matthew 5:44, emphasizes willful choice, as in 1 Corinthians 13's enduring love, while Habib carries a warmer, relational tone akin to Beloved in Song of Songs. Combined, they paint active, enemy-embracing love with covenantal bond and immediacy. From a Jewish perspective, this aligns with rabbinic teachings on loving the juror, the outsider, as oneself, expanding ahav beyond neighbors. Theologically, early church fathers like Augustine saw agape as divine love flowing through us, but the Aramaic original demands hands-on engagement that mirrors the incarnation. Linguistic studies, such as those by George Lamsa, 1933, suggest Habib implies a stronger relational warmth than agape's philosophical bent, forging a spiritual connection to God's purposes. So, what does Habib look like in action? Not just thinking kindly, but stepping into the mess with tangible steps that carry spiritual weight. Imagine turning the other cheek as Habib's bold invitation to break the violence cycle, allowing God's light to pierce the darkness. The command demands praying for persecutors, but Habib pushes further, actively seeking their good, becoming a conduit for divine mercy. From the Hebrew text, this echoes Proverbs 25:21, feeding your enemy if hungry, an act that invites God's intervention. Jewish interpreters like Maimonides saw this as ethical duty preventing hatred spread. But spiritually, it's about aligning with heaven's justice. Theologically, it's incarnational, mirroring Christ's cross where love conquered death. But living this out comes with risks, real, gut-wrenching ones that test our faith. In Jesus' time, loving a Roman could brand you a traitor. Today, bridging political divides might cost friendships or reputation. Why embrace such danger? Because Habib confronts our fear, exposing the illusion of safety in isolation, and revealing our dependence on God's strength. Historically, early Christians faced persecution yet practiced this, as in Acts 7 with Stephen praying for his killers, a moment of profound spiritual victory. From a Jewish viewpoint, This resonates with the prophets, calls to justice amid exile, like Jeremiah 29:7 seeking the cities, welfare even in captivity. Theologically, it reflects God's sovereignty. Loving enemies trusts His judgment, not ours, turning earthly conflicts into arenas for divine revelation. It's risky, but that's where true faith thrives, and where we often encounter God's presence most vividly. Picture David sparing Saul's life in 1 Samuel 24, not out of fear, but Habib-like mercy that wasn't just human ethics. It was yielding to God's spiritual guidance, a sign that even in enmity, divine order is at work. Or Jesus Himself, forgiving from the cross in Luke 23:34, where Habib became the ultimate revelation of God's heart, breaking the power of sin. From a Jewish perspective, this builds on Hosea 6:6, desiring mercy over sacrifice, pointing to a spiritual priority. Historically, figures like Martin Luther King Jr. embodied this in nonviolent resistance, echoing Habib's active commitment as a spiritual force against oppression. Theologically, Paul's words in Romans 12:20, heap coals by overcoming evil with good, a direct nod to Proverbs that illustrates how love disarms darkness. This forms a divine continuum where God's love manifests across time, from ancient Israel through Jesus, the early church, modern figures like MLK, to our 2026 digital world, connecting past, present, and future in His eternal plan. Yet these stories show it's possible, inspiring us to try in our own battles, revealing that Habib is part of God's eternal redemptive thread. Fast forward to 2026. Digital toxicity floods our screens. Polarized discourse turns neighbors into foes. How does Habib cut through? By reframing online rants as cries for restoration, as opportunities in a spiritual warfare, where Habib breaks cycles of evil. Imagine responding to hate with genuine inquiry, allowing God's truth to shine, and transforming digital spaces into fields of grace. Historically, this mirrors how early church councils navigated disputes with dialogue rooted in love. From a Jewish lens, it recalls Talmudic debates seeking truth over victory, infused with spiritual humility. Theologically, Ephesians 4:15 urges speaking truth in love, agape infused with Habib's warmth. Start small. Identify one enemy. Pray for their flourishing daily, inviting God's perspective into your heart. Then, reach out. A kind word, a helping hand, that becomes a vessel for divine reconciliation. Build from there, seeking reconciliation as in Matthew 5:24, where leaving your gift at the altar emphasizes spiritual purity. Jewish tradition emphasizes teshuvah, repentance and repair, as a pathway to God's favor. Theologically, this aligns with 2 Corinthians 5:18, ministry of reconciliation, entrusting us with God's message. Because Habib isn't theory, it's transformation, one step at a time, a spiritual discipline that draws us closer to Christ's likeness. Ultimately, Habib shifts enemy love from restriction to empowerment, freeing us from bitterness and opening doors to peace that surpasses understanding. The Hebrew Psalms sing of this deliverance, where God's peace prevails. Christian theology sees it as gospel in action, a revelation of the cross in daily life